Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. We're going to start a new series of videos today looking at Adobe Lightroom and showing you how you can import your photographs and develop them within the program itself. So what I'm going to do in this first episode is just do a really quick overview of how Lightroom works, show you how you can import your photos in and how you can get working on them straight away. There's a lot more details we can go into, but we'll look at that in future videos. For now, we're just going to look at how you get your photos into Lightroom and how you can start working on them as quickly as possible. So first thing to say is that Lightroom differs from programs like Photoshop. Photoshop actually works on the files on your computer. So you import a file into Photoshop, you work on it. If you save that file back to your computer without changing the file name, you have adjusted that actual file, and you can't go back over that afterwards. What Lightroom does is it actually builds almost like a virtual copy of that image within the program itself and makes the adjustments over the top of it. So you never actually adjust the original file. The original file will always stay where it was. So as we can see here, it says no photos in previous import. It may say something like no photos selected or no photos imported into Lightroom because I've deleted the ones out that I've already done. So we're going to start straight away by importing some photos. Now you've got two options here. You can come up to the top here where it says File, and you've got a drop down here that says Import Photos and Video with a keyboard shortcut of Control, Shift and I. We're not going to do that. We're going to use this button down here that says Import. So we click Import. And now Lightroom's going to ask us to select a source to import. Now you could be doing this directly from your SD card from your camera, your memory card, but I'm going to take it from a file that I already I've made on the computer. So this is a folder that's already saved on my computer and it's in the Photos section, and I've got them here, which is Lightroom Tutorial. So I'm going to highlight that folder, and instantly what that's going to do is just give me a preview of what the images are within that folder. So there we go. There's 22 images. These are quite a mixed bag. There's some JPEGs in there. There's some RAW files. So they're quite a collection of different images that we've got here to work on. So we've got the 22 images in here. As you can see at the moment, they're all ticked. Now, at this point, if you wanted to select which of these images you wanted to bring into Lightroom, let's say you didn't want this one to come in, you could untick that. When you click the import button at the bottom, that image would not be imported into Lightroom. And you could do it in groups. Let's say you wanted these two not to do it. Select one, hold down Shift on your keyboard, and that will select the other one as well. But for now, we're going to check all of the images and import them all in. At the top here, you've got some options. By default, because we're working from a folder that's already on the computer, Lightroom has given us the add option here. If you're importing from a memory card, you've got other options such as copy as DNG, which will convert your RAW files into DNG files, copy and move. But for now, we're just going to remain on the add here, and that's what we're going to look at. On the right hand side here, the right hand panel, we have an option here which is file handling. And for now, again, we're just going to leave this as the settings is. You've got options to change the size of the previews, which will dictate how quickly previews load within Lightroom. You could build smart previews, and we've got this ticked here which says do not import suspected duplicates. So if you put two of the same file within a folder and you only wanted one of them brought in, Lightroom would detect that you have two of the same file and only import one of them. So for now, we're going to leave that section alone as it is. Below this, we've got develop settings. If you've got presets that you want to add to the images as they're imported in, you can do that there. And we've got metadata. And metadata is going to allow you to add details to the images as they're imported in. So you could add copyright data, things like that, keywords. So let's, for example, just click New there. It's going to bring up a box here with a bunch of information. Let's call it Lightroom Tutorials. You can put a whole heap of different copyright information here. Let's just add my name in there. As I said, you've got loads of places here that you can add the camera info, GPS settings, all of that kind of thing, and that will be added to the files as they're imported in. So we'll click Create there. And there we go, that's now changed to metadata setting Lightroom tutorials as we named it. Keywords, you could type in whatever you want. If they were all of the images were for one place or one area, you could type that in. But again, let's just do Lightroom as a keyword, comma afterwards, same as any keywords that you're adding in, add a comma between them. So Lightroom tutorials. So all of these images will now have the keywords Lightroom tutorials. If in the future I wanted to go back and find them, I could use those keywords to pull up the images that have the keywords Lightroom tutorials. So for now, that's very basic. We're going to leave that as it is. Again, you can fill in as much or as little of that information as you want. So these are the images that we're going to import into Lightroom, and these are the ones that we can then start working in. So at the bottom here, we've got an import button. Let's click that. As you can see, it now says it's importing files. Okay, so there we go. So now we have the files imported into Lightroom. And as I said before, these aren't actually physically imported from the folder. These are almost like virtual copies that Lightroom has made from the folder you've selected and brought them into Lightroom as previews. And you can start working on them. And as I said, once you start working on them, you're not doing anything. It's completely non-destructive. The original files will still be in the original folder on your hard drive, untouched, until you export something out as a changed image, and then it will be saved as a separate file. But the original files will always remain as they are. Just quickly in this area here, before we move on to developing, you've got options here where you can rate and flag the images. You can go through, you can double click them, have a look at each of the images. You can use your left and right arrow keys to scroll through them. And at the bottom here, you have options to go back to the grid view with a shortcut of pressing G, so that will take us back to the grid view, and you've got an option there of what they call loop view by pressing E, which will pull up the individual images. So we'll keep it on the group view there. So that's basically how you get your images in. As I said, there's other areas where you can rate the images by flagging or star ratings or color ratings, but we'll look at that in another episode. For now, we're just going to look at the fact we've got the images into Lightroom and we can start working on them straight away. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come off of the library module here and come across to the next area which says develop. And as the name suggests, this is where we can start working on our images and making edits and changes to them and basically developing them. The whole idea of Lightroom is a digital darkroom, so you're developing your images within Lightroom. So click on the develop module, and that's going to load in the image that was selected from before. But you can see here over in the left-hand panel, we've got what's called a navigator window, which is showing us our image that is selected. If we scroll across the images on the bottom, that changes. At the bottom here, we have what's called a film strip, which will show us all of the images within the folder that we're working on. And as we move across there, you can see that the navigator in the top left-hand corner changes to enable us to be able to view that image a little bit larger. So I'm going to choose an image now, and I think I'm going to work on this image here. This was taken in the Tuileries Gardens in Paris last year, and it's just at sunset. And the reason I picked this image is because there's quite a lot we can do with it. It's not a perfect image, and there's a lot we can use Lightroom to adjust this image and make it look a whole heap better. So to start with, here's our main preview. You can see from the cursor that immediately we have a magnifying glass tool with a plus in it. If we do one click, that will bring the image up to a one-to-one view, and we can click and drag around the image with the little hand tool. Click in it again and it will bring it back to the full-size view. So that's zooming in and zooming out of the image to look at certain details. Coming over here to the right-hand side, this is where we're actually going to start working on our image. At the top here, we have our histogram. Right. If you're familiar with histograms, this is an indication of how the exposure and light within the image is played out. If we move our cursor across it, you can see at this end, it's showing us the blacks within the image, which is this large spike here. And you can see there's quite a lot of black in it. If we go across to the next little bit, that's showing us the shadows, and again we've got quite a bit of information there. The central area they're calling exposure, but this is basically your midtones, and you can see we've not got a lot of information within the midtones. Coming across here is our highlights, and we've got a big spike here, which is going to be caused by the sun through the trees there. And at the far end here, you can see it's showing us our whites, and we haven't got masses of information there. So we can start it's given us indications of where areas need to work in. We possibly need to lessen the shadows, lessen the highlights, and add more in the midtones. Just below the histogram here, we've got a toolbar. And we'll look at this in more detail later. I'm just going to quickly go through and say what each one is. First one here is a crop tool, and we've got a keyboard shortcut of R, which will allow us to crop the image and do any straightening and leveling. Next across is the spot removal tool, which will allow us to remove any blemishes that are on the image that we don't want there. Then we've got red eye correction, which is fairly self-explanatory. You get rid of red eye in portrait images. Next one across is our graduated filter with the keyboard shortcut of M. Then we've got a radial filter, and then at the end we've got an adjustment brush. But we'll look at those in more detail in another video. For now, we're just going to do a very basic edit just to show you how you can get started and get working on your images. So coming down from the toolbar, the first area we have here is called Basic. It may be folded up like this, and you just click the arrow and that gives you your basic panel here. Got a couple of options at the top: treatment, color, or black and white. So you can choose whether you're working as the image of a color image or a black and white image. We're just going to work on a color image for now, so we're going to leave that set as it is. Now our first block under this is our white balance, and because this is a raw file, we have the option to change the white balance via preset. So you can see here it says as shot. Then in the drop down you've got the same white balance options that you'd have within your camera, so you can go through those and see how that affects the white balance. Auto doesn't do massive daylight, warms it up a little bit. Cloudy warms it up a little bit more. Shade again is warming up. So each of these options here, tungsten is going to take it completely the other way there. So we've got a bunch of different options here that you can change just in presets, but I'm going to keep it as shot. Now, we also now have our two sliders to adjust white balance. Temperature, if we bring that to the left, will cool the image out, make it a colder, bluer image. If we bring it to the right-hand side, it's going to warm the image up and add more reds and oranges into it. If we want to reset this to 0, if we double-click either on the slider or the word temperature, it'll put it back to where it was originally. And we can see here that our color temperature is 5050. But we want to adjust this. I think we want to make some adjustments in this. So we can set our white balance by using a white balance eyedropper here. And you can see it's got a shortcut of the word W. So click on that. And now as you bring it in, you can see we've got the eyedropper tool and a little target card. And what we're looking for here, you can either use pure white or what's called a neutral grey. So we're looking for, I'm going to look for, there's no real pure whites in this image, so I'm going to look for an area that's a neutral grey. And I actually think around there's about right. One of the ways to know is if you look at the bottom of the screen, bottom of this little box here, we have RGB, which is red, green and blue. If those numbers are fairly close, you're on a neutral looking area of the image. So I'm going to click on that area, and you can see now that it's changed our temperature. It's changed our color temperature. The image has warmed up and it's jumped our color temperature up to 6550. I think possibly I might want it a little bit warmer, so I'm going to go ever so slightly up higher just to bring a little bit more of that red and orange in the sky. So there we go. I've jumped it up to just over 7,300. So the white balance tool gave us a starting point, and then I adjusted it from there. Under that white balance temperature, we now have tint, which if we bring that to the left, will bring in more of the greens of the image. If we bring it to the right, it will bring in more of the magentas. I think I preferred it as it was, so if I double click the word tint, then that's going to bring us back to our starting point, just to where we were there. So that's the white balance section taken care of. The next section down here is tone. And this is where we can really start to make some adjustments on our images. We've set our white balance, now we can start making some adjustments. First slider here is exposure. And as the name suggests, this controls the exposure within the image. If you slide it to the left, it's going to drop the exposure down. If you slide it to the right, it's going to raise the exposure up. Now, there was something that happened there that I needed to show you because I've turned something on here. As I slid that to the left here, you're getting these blue marks, and that's indicating dark areas of the image that are going to show as absolute black. The reason that's showing is on the top of the histogram here, I'd click this little triangle, so I'm going to the clipping triangle. So if I unclick that, that's now gone away. Neither here nor there. Let's move on. We'll look at that in greater detail later. So exposure, let's go bring that back to the center. And I think what we want to do is just bring the exposure up ever so slightly in this image. So we're starting to see a bit more detail. That'll do for a start. Underneath the exposure we have contrast. So lower the contrast down, flattens the image out. Raise the contrast up, it hardens the image up. Basically, contrast is the difference between the blacks and the whites within the image. It's going to either give a less of a difference, a more smoother transition, or a harder transition between the blacks and the whites. But we'll add a little bit of contrast. Let's add, say, 14, plus 14 on the contrast. Below the contrast, our next slider down here is highlights. And this is going to control, as the name suggests, the highlights within the image. Now, our biggest highlight here is the sun coming through the trees. And I think possibly we could get a little bit more detail in that. So if we start bringing the slider to the left, you can start to see now, if we bring it all the way to the left, we're getting a lot more detail in that area of the sky. We'll leave it as that. So there we go, that's made quite a difference. If we want to see what difference we've made overall at the moment, so we've made a few changes here, we've made a few changes to this image, but if we want to see where we started and where we are now, if you come down to the bottom of the screen here, you have a little box that says Y, 2 Ys in it. If we click that, this is going to give you a before and after view. So this is where the image started, and this is where we've got to now with just a couple of adjustments. And you can see we've made quite a difference. There are other ways of displaying this, but for now we're just going to do that. Now you can click that box back, or you can just press Y on your keyboard, and that will bring you back to the image there. If you want to check again, press Y on your keyboard, and you've got your original image on the left-hand side and your adjusted image on the right-hand side. So we've done highlights. Let's move on now. Next, we're with the shadows. And as the name suggests, this will lighten or darken the shadow areas of the image. And you can see here, the shadow areas are quite dark. If we bring them down, they get even darker. And we could bring them all the way down and have something like that, where it's a lot more of a silhouetted sunset kind of image. But I think we want to show some detail. So let's bring our shadow slider up. Bring it up to just about 75, 76. And you can see now the difference that's made. If I double click that back to where it was, that's where it started, and I brought it up to around 75. And that's a huge difference. The amount of detail we're now getting in the shadow area, we can see all the people, we can see detail in the trees as well. So now we've adjusted our exposure, our contrast, our highlights, and our shadows. Next option down here is whites. So this will boost or lower the whites within the image. Now we can just slide this around and take out the whites or really add in the whites. But a really good option here is that if you hold down your Alt key and then start to move the slider, you can see now the screen's gone completely black. And as we move the slider to the right, you can start to see these little areas appear. And this is where the highlights are going to be shown as pure white and possibly blown out. So a good tip is just to have a little bit of the whites starting to show through. Possibly like that. If we let go of the Alt key, now we can see that we've still got the detail, we haven't blown anything out too much, but we've boosted the whites. Next down is our black slider, and this works in exactly the same way as the white slider. So we're going to hold down our Alt key, click on the black slider. This time the screen goes completely white, and as we bring the slider now to the left, you can start to see these areas showing, and these will show areas that will come out as pure black. And with the blacks, I like to have a little bit more showing as pure black than with the whites, just because it helps with the contrast, I feel. And again, it's personal taste. So I'm going to go with something like that. Let go of the Alt key. And there we go. So if we press the Y key again, we can see where this image started and where we've got to with it so far. And I think you'll agree, we've made quite a difference to the image. We've opened up the shadow areas, we've got a lot more color in the sky, we've got a lot more detail in around where the sun's actually coming through the tree. So we're, in a very short space of time, we've made quite a difference to this image. So press Y again, we'll come back to the original view. The last section here in the Basic tab is called Presence, and this is given us clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Now, clarity is one of those sliders that can definitely help an image, but it can also definitely ruin an image. If you use the clarity too strongly or too weakly, then it will definitely ruin your image. So let's show you what I mean. If we pull the clarity slider all the way to the left, you can see it's softened everything out and it's given this sort of unreal, dreamy kind of effect, which really isn't that pleasing. If we take it all the way to the right, it's really pushing the details. It's really making it almost like an HDR kind of image, but somewhere in between. So let's double click on that, bring it back to 0, and let's just add a little bit of clarity to this image. Let's say 21%. For an example, let's zoom in on the image now. Reset the clarity. And you can see how the image softened up a little bit there. Some people think clarity adds sharpness. It doesn't really, but it will give an impression of sharpness there. So there, we've added the clarity back in at 21. So that's the clarity. Next we've got vibrance, and vibrance will work on the vibrancy of your colors of the image. If we bring this to the left, it'll start to reduce the vibrancy, and you get a much more muted kind of look. If we go down, we're starting to get towards almost like a cross-processed looking image. If we bring it to the right-hand side, you can see now that it's really starting to add vibrancy into the colors. And I think there is room for some vibrancy in here. It's a beautiful looking sunset. So let's go about there, about 25 on the vibrancy. Saturation at the bottom, really, as the name suggests, will saturate the colors. If you bring it to the right hand side, you're taking all of the color saturation out of the image, and it's a monochrome image. If we push it to the right hand side, you can start to see that it really saturates the colors. It's a much stronger effect than the vibrancy, and I don't actually feel in this image that it actually needs the saturation. I might just add a tiny little bit. There, +5. So there we go. That's the Basic tab taken care of. And you can see there, just by using this one tab, we've actually made a huge difference. We'll press Y and do the before and after, so you can see the difference that we've made between the original shot and the work we've done it just using the Basic tab on this side is very impressive. So scrolling down, and again, like I said, I will go through all of these in more detail in other videos. Next one down, we have tone curve. And you have some options here. It'll probably open up looking like this, where it has highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. And you can move these sliders around to adjust the highlights, so it's pulling the highlights down. And you can see on the tone curve that the tone curve is moving as I move the sliders. Lights is a wider kind of tone here. You can see that's actually affecting the entire image rather than just the highlights. It's making it lighter or darker. Darks, again, exactly the same. Brighten up the image to the right, darken it down to the left. Shadows, again, we can pull more detail in the shadows or darken the shadows down. But you can see in each of those that the curve line here is moving. If you click this at the bottom here, it gets rid of those options, and now you can use the curve line as a more traditional curve and just make your own adjustments as you please. So I'm going to leave that like that. So that's the tone curve area. Again, as I said, we'll come back and we'll look at these things in more detail. Next we have HSL, which stands for Hue, Saturation and Luminosity. And you can see, first off, it opens up in Hue, and you've got all of the different options for hues within the image. So if we go on the red slider, we start to bring it towards the right hand side, it's going to more a yellowy orange. If we bring it to the right hand side, it's going to affect any of the reds. But as you can see, actually it didn't make that much difference because there aren't that many reds in this image, so we should have picked the orange. Let's do that. Let's look on the orange slider here, and if we watch around the sunset and around this area, as I bring this to the right hand side, it's heading more towards yellowy green kind of tones. If we bring it to the left hand side, we're going down into more orange and red kind of tones there. I'll put that back to 0. Now there is another way of using this hue and saturation section, and it's to click this little button here. Now if we click that, as we drag our cursor in, you can see that we have a little button with a couple of arrows. If we go to an area that we're looking to adjust the hue, the color in, and click, let's say here, we click there. If we start to push up as we're clicking that, you can see in the sliders it's moving the orange and the yellow sliders to adjust that to a more orange and a more yellow and green kind of look. If we drag down, those sliders will now head down, and we're heading more into the darker oranges and the reds of the image. But that's a really good way of adjusting anything there. If at any point you feel that you've made an adjustment and you don't like what you've actually done, if you come over here to the left hand side, you've got a drop down tab which is open, which is History. And this is showing us every single move we've made on this image, every adjustment we've made from the time that we started working on it to the present moment. So you can see that the last thing I did was yellow hue shift. If I didn't like the effect that had made, if I just click down, it's now leaving the image at that previous state. It's disregarding the yellow hue shift and just using it at that previous state. I can come all the way down here to when we adjusted the saturation, and that's taking it back to that state there. And we can go backwards and forwards within the history. So if at any point you think you've overdone something or you shouldn't have done it, you just go to the previous state. So I'm going to come back up here to the orange hue shift and leave it there. So that's a way of going backwards and forwards. Now, that's how the hue, saturation, and luminosity work. We'll go into this in more detail in another episode, as I said. You've also got options to change the color saturation, and you can use the little drop button as well there. So if we do that and pull down, you can see we're actually taking the saturation out of that part of the sky. If we use it to pull up, you can see we're adding saturation back into that area as well. But we'll leave those as they were. And then luminosity will basically just adjust the brightness of each of those colors. So again, using the little radial dot tool here, if we bring that down, it's actually darkening the oranges and the yellows there. If we bring it up, it will lighten the oranges and yellows there. I actually think a little bit of darkening looks quite nice. Okay, so that's basically the HSL section taken care of. The next one down is split toning, and this is where you could choose to add different hues and tones to your highlights and shadows, adjust the saturation on them. But again, that's something to look at in another episode. You've got things like lens correction, which would help with lens distortion. Again, we'll look at that in a different thing. Transform and effect, camera calibrations. We'll leave that out. So the final thing I'm going to look at here is our details tab. So we click the details tab, and this is where you can adjust your sharpening and noise reduction. Now, it really depends on how you like to work, whether you like to do the noise reduction first or the sharpening first. Personally, I like to do the noise reduction first and then sharpen afterwards. So we can come into our image and we can click, and that will give us our 1:1 100% view. And you can see there is a bit of noise within this image. It was shot at low light. So we're going to use a little bit of noise reduction here. So we click the luminance, slide that up, and you can see now that it starts to soften the image out and add a little bit of noise reduction. I'm only going to do around 25, so I'm going to add 25 there. I'm going to boost my detail slider because that will help maintain a little bit of the sharpness around the edges. Next we have sharpening, and again you can go way too far and over sharpen your image like that, or take some of the sharpness out. I'm going to boost the sharpening up to around 45, 50. Let's go 45. Radius I'll leave as it is as 1 pixel, and detail I'll leave as it is there. The masking slider here, if you hold down Alt on your keyboard, same as we did when we were doing the blacks and the whites in the basic, hold down that and then click on your slider. See the screen's gone white now. As we move this up, any area that comes through as black will not be sharpened, only the areas that come through as white. It basically is masking the sharpening tool. So really, I mean, for sharpening, you really just want the edges. So I'm going to push this across. So the sharpening is not affecting any area that's in black. It's only affecting areas that are in white. Let go of your Alt button. And there you go. That's a nice bit of sharpening. We'll click back on the image to bring it to a one-to-one view. So I think as a basic rundown, as showing you how you can import your images and how you can do some really quick and easy adjustments on them. Let's press the Y button and do the side-by-side compare. This is where our image started. This is where we've got to in a very short space of time, and I think it's made a huge difference. I think you'll agree, really simple. Just a few adjustments in each of the sections has made a massive difference to this image. Let's press Y, get it back to full screen. And the thing we want to do now, you can come back to this image and re-edit it time and time again. But let's say you're happy with how it looks now, and you'd like to export a copy of this to save to your hard drive. So we come up to the top here, go File, we have Export, click Export, and this is going to ask us where we would like to save our images to. I've got a folder here called Lightroom Tests. So I'm going to save it out to that. You've got an option here to rename the image. I think I've already done this, so I'm going to change that to just to add AA on the end of it. So that's going to give us our name. Click Export. There's a whole, you can go through a whole heap of different options of stuff you want to put in there. File setting, I'm going to leave it as a high quality JPEG. Color space as sRGB. And just click Export. You see at the top left hand corner here we've got a little progress bar which is an export one file. This will move across now. And there you go, the bar's moved across. And basically what it's done is it's made a JPEG file of this image with all the adjustments that we've made. So if we now go to that folder, Lightroom Tests, there's our image. There's our image saved as a JPEG within the folder that we want. We could go back at any time into Lightroom and make more adjustments, different adjustments to this image, take it back to previous states, turn it into a black and white, re-export it out as a separate file, and then you would have all of the versions that you've made of that image available to save out and export out. So there we go. That's a really quick tutorial on how you import images into Lightroom and how you start working on them quickly, which I think is what most people want. I think most people just want to be able to get their images into Lightroom and to start making adjustments on them straight away. But as I said, in future episodes, we'll look in more detail at some of the different areas and some of the different tools and adjustments you can make within Lightroom. If you like what you see on the Photo Show, please comment, like and subscribe. I'm Dave Vickers. This is the Photo Show. Thanks for watching. See you next time.